Happy Monday to all of you. I'm so glad you've come back to join us for another installment of Cozy Horror. So, let's get you all installed in something comfortable, somewhere comfortable, with a nice hot drink and a nice warm blanket as you sit around the cozy fire and hear some stories, maybe old and new, who knows, as we enjoy our time together today. Today's theme is going to be Dads in Peril. So, let's hear some stories about some strange dads. Coming up first, we hear a story about a man trying to protect his family from a very strange kind of theft. So, let's hear a tale about things that might be better left alone, as we hear about how it took our socks.
I shouldn't have cared so much. They were just socks after all. But it was becoming such a problem. We moved into our house about 3 months ago, our first real house. I honestly thought this was going to be a fresh start for my wife, my daughter, and I. We've been bumping around from place to place since Lisa was born, and we'd lived in a new home every year since she was a year old. It had nothing to do with our landlords or rowdy neighbors or paranormal happenings, as is often the case in these kind of stories. Her mother and I simply kept getting better jobs, which required us to move from one side of town to the other for work. That kind of moving made it hard for Lisa to make any friends or feel comfortable in any place she knew, since she knew she just had to pack up and leave again soon. After 8 years of moving around and never fully unpacking, my wife and I gained some level of job stability. I was a junior VP with the company I worked at, and my wife had become a manager at the store where she worked. This meant the money was steady, the job was consistent. We decided it was time for something a little more permanent. We started house hunting right away, and after a few weeks, we stumbled across what we thought was our dream home. It was less than 30 minutes from both my office and her store, a bus ride away from school for our daughter, positioned out of town so as not to deal with the constant noise of the big city, and a big backyard with plenty of room for our growing family. As I look back on it now, I never would have expected what came next. We'd been in the house for less than a week when I first started noticing the socks were missing. "Honey, have you seen my black dress socks?" I was standing in the laundry room, looking into the dryer like I expected my missing sock to just appear out of thin air. My wife walked onto our back porch to see what I was talking about, her bathrobe replaced with a work uniform. I should have left for work 10 minutes ago. I would miss my carpool at this rate. But there I stood with one sock on and one bare foot. I had searched under, around, and on top of the dryer for the missing sock, and had finally started looking into the empty dryer like an utter fool. My wife said she hadn't seen it, but wondered if I'd seen the fluffy pink socks she liked to wear to work. "I'm missing the left one," she said good-naturedly, but I could tell she wasn't pleased about it. We both shrugged it off at the time. We had just moved in, and there were still boxes to unpack. We figured our socks had just gotten lost in the shuffle. As the first month went on, however, and the boxes slowly became less and less, we found it off-putting that we hadn't seen any of our missing socks. Quite the contrary. I was now missing 12 socks out of 15 pairs that I owned. This wasn't such a huge deal for me. I owned 15 pairs of business dress socks that went with my suits, and I could easily match them together. My wife, on the other hand, was fuming because she was missing some of the cute socks she liked to wear to work. Not just our socks. Lisa's socks were missing too. Not to mention that Lisa hadn't been sleeping well since we moved into the new house. Since the first night, she'd been woken up in the wee hours of the morning by a strange noise outside our window. She never saw what made the noise. It never poked a grisly maw up over the windowsill to scare her, but she said it sounded like fingernails scratching along the side of the house. I went and looked, too, and there were definitely scratch marks on the bricks outside her window. They were going up towards the kitchen and maybe towards the laundry room. I put it off at the time and made a note to trim the tree branches the next time I was doing yard work. We had quite a few large oaks in the backyard, and their branches did hang pretty low to the ground. Other than the socks and the noise, Lisa loved her new house. She had friends over to play in the big backyard and had a huge room for all her toys and games, a bathroom all to herself. She would always follow every puffy-eyed morning up with, "But I still love the house, Dad. Please don't make us move," no matter how many times I assured her that this was our house now and we weren't going anywhere. Sitting in the bedroom now with all of them clustered around me, I don't know if I still feel that way or not. About a month ago, the activity started to escalate. It was the holiday rush for the company I worked for. October, November, and December are big advertising months. I was working later than usual these days, to meet my deadline. I had been dozing at my desk, and I jumped one evening as the phone rang, not even realize what time it was. I looked at the clock and gasped when I realized it was almost 8:30. That would be Maggie, I thought, calling to make sure I was okay. Lisa would be in bed already, and Maggie would call to see if she needed to wait up for me or go to bed. Her store was experiencing the same holiday blitz as mine, and she would most likely relish the idea of rolling into unconsciousness until the alarm went off again. I caught the phone on the third ring. "Hello? David, please, I need you to come home now." It was Maggie, but she sounded funny. Not funny ha-ha, but funny scared. She was whispering into the phone, and in the background I could hear someone crying. I guessed that it must be Lisa. The two were likely in the bedroom, the farthest room in the house from anything, with the door locked and the windows drawn. "Maggie, what's going on?" There's something on the back porch," she whispered. "Something big. David, I need you to come home. I think it might be a prowler." "Okay, Maggie, I'm on my way. You two just sit tight, okay?" I had already grabbed my briefcase and my coat and was heading out the door. I made the 23-minute drive in 10 minutes, and I was lucky I didn't see a single police officer. As I pulled into the front yard, I popped the trunk and took out one of the golf clubs I'd had in there since my last golfing trip. It was a big old sturdy driver, and I felt sure that it would be a force to be reckoned with, unless the prowler had a gun, of course. I moved around the side of the house, keeping my back against the wall as I went, and when I got to the back porch, I listened for the sound of something moving around. I'd put a heavy deadbolt on the door leading from the house to the back porch, and I was pretty confident that it was still on. As I listened, I heard something, and I tensed as I cranked my senses up to 11. It was a scuttling sound, like claws on asphalt, but it was also a weird sort of gloopy sound that was barely audible over the scraping and the clawing feet. I relaxed a bit, thinking it was probably just a raccoon or a possum, and stepped around the corner as I threw open the door and brandished the club. I expected to find an animal, a startled animal that would hiss and run away, but I was unprepared for what awaited me as I threw open the screen door and stepped out on the back porch. Nothing. There was nothing on my back porch, except for the storage boxes we kept out there and the washer and dryer. I looked around, moving the washer and dryer to see if anything had clawed its way behind it, but there was nothing to be found except some scrape marks on the tile. I decided there was a hole somewhere that a critter was getting in through. Upon further investigation, I discovered that the silver tube that hooked the dryer to the outflow was knocked off. I secured it and locked the screen door and went around to the front door to let my wife know that it was just a raccoon or something. She was far from satisfied with this explanation. "It sounded way bigger than a raccoon, David. I'm sure I heard something out there. There are noises that Lisa keeps hearing, too. What if it's some pervert who's stealing our socks?" "Socks? Is that something that people really got off on?" I asked. She wasn't amused. "I'm serious, David. I want you to do something about this." So I did. I called the contractor and had him come look at the back porch. He couldn't find any way that something could be coming in, but he said he'd pest seal all the exit holes and suggested that I call a pest control company to put out some repellent and keep the critters away. I thought maybe this would stop the problem, but it only seemed to escalate it. Socks began missing at an alarming rate. 3 pairs in one night, 4 pairs in one night. By the end of the month, we'd be through 4 packs of dress socks. Maggie was putting a lot of pressure on me to solve this problem. I was getting angry. My work was beginning to suffer for lack of sleep and lack of focus. 2 days ago, I finally had enough. When I came home to find my sleep-deprived wife dozing on the back porch, all her laundry done during the day now, and having to sit with it to keep it safe, I knew something had to give. I took a week off work, citing stress at home and a need for rest. I staked out the back porch. I had purchased a jumbo-sized packing box, big enough for me to sit in and stake out the back porch to catch whatever was doing this. I was no longer convinced it was a critter, and the fact that everything was reset back the way I had left it in the morning told me it was a devious individual with a lot of experience at this particular pastime. I set up the box and put some snacks, some water bottles, and a gun that I had bought just for the occasion in one corner. I made myself comfortable, as comfortable as you can in a huge box, I guess, and settled in for the night with my phone out and my energy shots close at hand. I must have fallen asleep, because when I woke up, it was to the sound of scrabbly claws again. I peeked out from the box, expecting to see an animal or maybe a weird little man with a sack and a mask like in the manga I had read as a kid. But I did not expect to find what I found out there. My cell phone light shook as the creature came into focus. It was amorphous, like an oozing potato, with 6 long human-like arms coming out of its body. Each arm ended in a hand, and each hand ended in a finger, and each of the 6 fingers each had a little hand that were tipped with long, dirty nails. This was the sound I'd been hearing, the creature scuttling along on its long, dirty nails as it clicked across the back porch. It didn't see me right away. It had its head in the dryer. But when it came out, I could see a smooth and bloated head with no neck and a snarl of long, greasy black hair that looked like a wig. It held one of my daughter's socks in a 7th and 8th pair of hands. As it looked at it through watery black eyes, it reached into its body with the other hand and pulled out something. It pulled out what looked like a baby. It looked like an amorphous potato baby that squalled in a soft little gloopy way and waved feebly with its 8 stumpy arms. The creature took the sock and stretched the neck of it out before it placed the squalling thing inside it. The baby stopped glooping at once, making some watery burbles as the creature slid it back into its flesh. And as the creature turned to go, it finally caught sight of me. I saw it scamper towards the back of the dryer, somehow condensing itself to slip in and out again. As it pushed itself into that pipe, it finally saw my flashlight, and I saw the skinned back, 2 large jaws that dominated the front of its face. It looked like a weird Halloween mask, the ones that are a little too uncanny. It opened its mouth and made a sound like an angry river rushing up to swallow me. I shot it then. I rattled off 3 panicked shots before I could stop myself, and it stopped in its tracks and looked startled. I don't know if I hit it. I don't even know if my bullets could kill it, but I was so scared at that moment that I did the only thing my lizard brain determined was the right course of action. I ran. I flipped out of the box and ran, slamming the door behind me and throwing the bolt as something large and angry thundered against the other side. My wife was there then, pale and unsure, wanting to know what had happened. I turned her around and grabbed Lisa as she came sleepily up the hall. I pulled them all in the direction of the bedroom and locked the door behind us, pushing the chest of drawers in front of it. The police have come and gone now. I called 911 before I started writing this, but they couldn't find anything on the back porch. The officers figured that maybe a bear wandered up or something. They're supposed to be hibernating, but it happens sometimes. Their only real question was how it had gotten out without dropping a single drop of blood after being shot. The back porch is a disaster. It certainly wasn't worried about keeping a low profile this time. The police gave me the number to animal control and told me to call in the morning so they could have a look for the wounded bear. I'm not calling animal control, though. In the morning, we're going to pack up everything dear to us and just get the hell out of here. If that thing can fit through the hole in the laundry room, I have no idea how small it can squeeze. Since the police left, I can hear something outside the windows. I can hear those dirty fingernails as they scrape along the brick walls of the house. Could it squeeze through the crack under the front door? Could it come in through a sewer pipe? My family drifted off into a shallow sleep, but I'm sitting here on the bed, gun by my knee, just listening for the sounds. It stopped scraping its claws about 5 minutes ago. I don't know if that should be comforting or not. I wish I'd just let it keep the socks.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I stand off so often from mating socks. You should see it. There's a huge basket in my laundry room just full of loose socks, but I assume that's a norm in most laundry rooms. Coming up next, we hear about a dad looking at his son's odd new hobby as he tries his best to come to terms with what's going on there. So, let's hear a story about too many teeth.
Daddy, I lost a tooth. He lisped a bit as he said it, and as I held my hand out, I saw that he had, indeed, lost a tooth. It was one of the front ones, and I congratulated him on losing it so cleanly. I wondered if he had pulled it out himself, but I put that out of my mind. Brandon didn't even pull his own splinters out, and I really couldn't see him yanking out his own teeth. He was 6 and 1 month, as he liked to say, and this was the first tooth that he had lost. He was late in that respect. Many of his friends had already started losing baby teeth, but he was giddy as he brought this one to me. "Now, the tooth fairy'll come and take it away," he said, skipping off to continue playing. Ah, yes, I'd forgotten about that part. Brandon had become obsessed with the tooth fairy after his friend Nina had lost her tooth. He thought of her like the blue fairy from the Pinocchio story, and he was very excited that she would come through his window and leave money for his teeth. He had asked what she did with all those teeth, where she got all the money, and 1,000 other things. I was a pretty creative person, and I'd come up with all kinds of stories about what she did with them, where she got the money, and how she came in without making a sound. On and on and on. I was kind of glad that he had finally lost a tooth, because I was starting to run out of material and thought if he experienced it, he might lose interest in it. We put it under his pillow that night, and I assured him that it would be gone in the morning and there would be money when he got up. Then, of course, I fell asleep waiting for my wife to get home and woke up to find her sleeping beside me and the sun already peeking over the horizon. I went quickly but quietly and thanked my lucky stars that Brandon was a sound sleeper. He hadn't woken up yet, and I took the $1 I was going to put under his pillow out of my pocket and prepared to make the swap. To my surprise, however, the tooth was already gone. No one had left money, but the tooth had disappeared. I looked around, thinking it had slipped out, but it was just gone. I left the $1 anyway, not wanting him to be disappointed, and went back to my room to get more shut-eye before the alarm went off. We never made it to the alarm because Brandon came in waving the $1 and saying that the tooth fairy had come. "Look what the tooth fairy left me. He said it was all for me." I told him that was awesome, but internally I raised an eyebrow. He? The tooth fairy had always been a woman anytime he'd talked about her before. Maybe, I thought, Brandon had just had a dream or something that night. He put the money in his piggy bank, and I figured we could maybe put the thing behind us. 2 days later, as I put him to bed, I put my hand beneath his pillow and felt something strange. I took my hand out and found another tooth. "What's this?" I asked. "Oh, I lost another tooth," Brandon said. No excitement, no hope that the tooth fairy would come, just a matter-of-fact tone. I guess that was what I wanted. His obsession with the tooth fairy had ended when he finally lost a tooth. He'd gone from being absolutely excited to absolutely unfazed, and that stopped me for a moment. "Why didn't you tell me you had another loose tooth, buddy?" I don't know. It just kind of happened. I put the tooth back under his pillow, telling him to make sure to say something next time, and then I kissed him goodnight and put him to bed. When I went to put the money under his pillow a little later, though, the tooth wasn't there. Instead, there was a coin. I took a look at it, thinking it was a $50, but
realized I was wrong almost at once. At first, I thought it was one of those weird chocolate coins you sometimes got for Christmas. Turning it, I realized it was just extremely grubby. It was heavy, like it was made out of brass or copper, and the surface looked dirty, like it had been at the bottom of a well for quite some time. I started to take it with me, something in me wanting to keep it away from my son, but I put it back instead. It wasn't mine after all, and by the look of it, it was probably something that he treasured. It had been back under his pillow for less than a second before his hand went searching for it. His fingers took hold of it almost greedily as he clutched it, and I decided to take the dollar back with me. Brandon changed a bit after that night, but it's only in retrospect that I see it. He became very secretive, not my little buddy like he used to be. Brandon didn't want to play video games in the living room with me anymore. He didn't want to read stories at bedtime either. He spent a lot of time in his room and seemed to be closing off. His mother laughed at me when I told her that my feelings were a little bit hurt by it. He's just being a kid. Kids go through phases sometimes. Don't take it so personally. A couple of months from now, he'll probably be back to his usual self again. I hoped he would, but it was hard to ignore the physical changes that were going on in him as well. Not only was Brandon quieter, but it seemed like he had grown. He hadn't gained a foot in a single week, but sometimes it seemed like his fingers were abnormally long, his arms strangely jointed, and his face was oddly stretched. He would look at me sometimes, look at me like he was thinking about doing something that he knew would make me angry. I didn't like it, but he never did it right out in the open. Like I said, Brandon never came to sit with me or play video games, but I would sometimes catch him peeking at me from the hallway or from under the table in the kitchen. It was creepy, but I figured it was just little kid behavior. A month after Brandon lost his first tooth, I found another one in his backpack. Well, no, not just one. I found 5 hidden in the front pocket of his backpack after he left it on the kitchen table when he went to go to the bathroom. He had become pretty protective of that backpack, putting it in his room or keeping it close by at all times, and I started getting suspicious of what might be in there. I didn't think it was drugs or anything. He was 6, but I thought it might be something weird or dangerous. What if he had a snake or something in there? So when he suddenly ran off to go to the bathroom, I knew this was my chance to have a look. I needed to sign his folder for school anyway, so I took out the folder and looked over the day's report before taking a peek in the pockets. The teeth were just sitting there, bumping together when I poked at them, but they didn't really look like human teeth. They looked more like animal teeth, and they were too strange to have come out of my son's mouth. They might have been from a cat or a dog, I suppose. Maybe a, "What are you doing?" I zipped the backpack and turned around, looking like I'd been caught doing something I shouldn't. "Nothing, just signing your folder." Brandon looked at me with a great deal of mistrust, taking the backpack and going to his room without putting his back to me. I told his mother about the teeth when she came back from work, but she brushed it off again, saying that little kids often collected strange things. "My brothers collected animal skeletons they found in the woods," she said dismissively, as we got ready for bed. "Thank goodness it's just teeth and not a whole skull." I let it go, but it was hard not to see what was going on. Brandon started looking like he wasn't sleeping well. He had huge bags under his eyes, and he was fidgety any time he was made to sit still, like at dinner or for homework. He would get short and agitated, muttering to himself in a way I couldn't understand. I listened carefully once when he was doing math homework, and it sounded like he was talking in a different language. He looked up when he saw me noticing, squinting at me with that look of distrust, and it broke my heart to see him like that. Brandon had always been my little buddy, and this sudden change in him was painful to watch. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the school. They needed to speak with me about something important. Brandon, it seemed, had been in a fight where he had knocked more than a few of the kids' teeth out. I came down right away, afraid that Brandon had been hurt, but when I saw him sitting in the principal's office, he looked none the worse for wear. He had a bruise on his cheek, and his hands looked like he had beat them against a wall, but he didn't seem injured or in distress at all. Quite the contrary, Brandon looked happier than I had ever seen him. I took a seat next to him in the office, waiting to see what they thought was so important. We called you in, not because Brandon has been fighting, but because of other rumors going around his class. Rumors? I asked. Yes, sir. The student he fought with said Brandon had been making strange deals with other students. I shook my head, not quite understanding. What kinds of deals? They say he's been buying people's teeth. I shuddered, thinking about the teeth in the bag I'd saw not too long ago. I looked down at Brandon, questioning him with my eyes as to whether it was true. He looked back at me without hesitation, pretty much letting me know that it was. He's been trading his lunch for them. He's been trading other things for them, too. Toys and small things. He's allegedly traded over 20 students for their teeth across 3 grades. Today, the student in question had taken the trade but refused to give him any teeth. Your son responded by beating the teeth out of his mouth. I looked down at Brandon, asking what he was thinking. He didn't bother to answer, just clenched his fists in his lap and looked at the floor. I think that was when it really hit me how much he had changed. The bags under his eyes were dark and deep, and his fingers were long enough that I couldn't see how anyone didn't notice. Each finger seemed twice as long as it should be, and as he clenched, I could see a 4th knuckle on each of them. The reason we called you in, sir, is, well, to get those teeth back. I turned and looked at the principal. What do you mean? He looked a little green as he wiped his forehead with a napkin. We believe your son has the missing teeth, but he won't tell us where they are, and he won't give them back to us. We can't seem to find them, and the mother is hopeful that the dentist can put them back in if they're not too badly damaged. If anything else, they want them back so they can take them to the dentist and make sure they're baby teeth and not permanent. Brandon hasn't said a word about where he put them, and we are deeply troubled by this behavior. I looked at Brandon and asked him where the teeth were. He shook his head, not saying a word. I asked him again, and when he shook his head this time, I heard something. Something nearly indistinguishable, but altogether unsettling. Something was rattling in his mouth. We can sit here until you decide to give us the teeth, but you're not leaving until we get them back. I don't know what's gotten into you, I said, but the idea that we wouldn't be leaving seemed to decide him. He bent slowly over the principal's desk, making eye contact with the older man the whole time as he opened his mouth. 3 teeth fell out as he pushed his tongue out, and none of them appeared to be his. The teeth clattered on the desk like old dice, and more than one of them had a root hanging from them. As he sat back up, I had the sneaking suspicion that he was holding out. The principal, however, seemed more than okay with what he had gotten back. He told us to go, saying that Brandon was suspended for 2 weeks, and I collected up my son as we headed for the door. The principal managed not to vomit before we got out of his office, but it was a near thing. We talked the entire way home. Well, I talked. Brandon just sat there and said nothing. I told him I didn't know what this was about, but that he needed to stop. This wasn't him. This wasn't like him, and he needed to tell me what was going on so I could help. I was his dad. I wanted to help him, but I couldn't help him if he didn't talk to me. The whole time he just sat there and stared at me. Most kids who are being chastised look out the window or look at their feet, but he stared directly at me in brazen defiance. His fingers kept flexing, and I saw him put a hand to his pocket more than once. I wanted to tell him to turn them out, to give me the tooth from that kid that he had kept, but something in me didn't quite dare. I was loath to admit it, but I was a little bit afraid of my son in that moment. He looked nothing like the boy that I had known for almost 7 years. My grandma used to tell me stories about babies taken by fairies and the changelings they left behind. This reminded me of those stories. The kid in front of me was so fundamentally different from the one I knew that it was almost like talking to a different person. As we pulled up in the yard, I told him he was grounded. No tablet, no TV, no dessert. But Brandon didn't seem to care. He just walked inside and went to his room. His tablet was still on the charger, and his TV remote was left hanging off the door to his room. I didn't know what he was doing in there, but it clearly wasn't playing. He was way too quiet, and when his mother called to tell me that she was working a double, I almost cried. I didn't want to be alone with him for longer than I had to be, and that made me feel even worse. He didn't come out for dinner, and when I went to bring him a plate a little while later, I heard muffled voices as he spoke to someone. I tried to get the teeth, but they caught me. I didn't know who he was talking to. Kind of thought he might be talking to himself, but when a gruff voice responded, I felt my stomach drop. "You'll just have to do better next time." The voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was deep and watery, like something from the bottom of a well, and it spoke in a way that made its mouth sound strangely full. It was devoid of any sort of kindness or charity, the sounds you sometimes hear when people speak to children. It was an authoritative voice, a teacher, and they were not pleased with my son. "I'm grounded. They suspended me from school. I'm not going to be able to get you any teeth for at least 2 weeks. "Your father has teeth," it said matter-of-factly. "Your mother has teeth too." When he answered, he didn't sound afraid. When he answered, it was with cold assuredness. "They won't just give them to me. They don't understand what I'm doing." What was he doing? That's what I wanted to know. I gripped the doorknob, hoping they wouldn't hear me, and that was when the voice said something that made my blood run cold. "Then do not ask them. Take them, like you did from the boy today." I opened the door in one fluid motion, and my son looked up guiltily as I walked into the room. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. "No one," he said, much too quickly. "I heard someone," I said. "I heard someone in here talking to you, and I want to know who it was and where they went." That was a lie. I didn't think I wanted to know who they were. What I wanted was for them to never come back. The person had sounded like some kind of demonic fairy from a kid's story, and I was afraid of what I would see if he did come back. "It's nothing," Brandon said quickly. Too quickly. I was doing voices." I talked to him for a little while longer, but I got nothing. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't tell me anything, and eventually I just left. I should have left it at that. I should have just left it alone. But I had to try one more time. It was late, about 10:30, which is pretty late for us, and I decided to try a peace offering. I felt pretty certain he was still awake. I had heard something moving around in there, so I cut some of the pie I had made to go with dinner and walked to his room. I was going to offer him the pie and see if maybe we could talk. I just wanted to know what it was that had made him change so much. Most of all, I just wanted my son back. It killed me to have him act like this, but as the door came open, I got more answers than I had bargained for. It was standing over his bed, its arm going under his pillow, and in the darkness of his room, I realized it had to be what he'd been talking to. The pie fell to the ground, but I had a death grip on the plate. I realized later I had sprained my thumb once I was in any state to feel anything. I didn't speak. I could barely breathe, and as the thing turned to look at me, I realized my fairy theory might not be too far off. It was grubby looking, like something that's been living in a ditch. Its features were completely covered in something dark that had the texture of earth, except for the two large lamp-like eyes that protruded from its face like bubble lights. It was tall, something I realized as it took its full height. It had been crouched before, putting something under my son's pillow, and it had to stoop so as not to bang its head on the ceiling, which was about 9 feet from the floor. From its back, 4 insectile wings protruded. They weren't large enough to carry it, but they were large enough to be noticeable. Its hands and arms, the fingers multi-jointed, were far from delicate looking as it wiggled them ceaselessly. I expected it to charge me. I expected it to attack me, but instead, it raised one huge finger to its face and made a shushing sound. "Shh! You'll wake the baby," it whispered, and its mouth sounded like it was trying to swallow something. Then it smiled, and I saw not a double, but a triple row of teeth inside its mouth. There's no order to them. Molars next to canines, next to bicuspids, next to what appear to be fangs and shark teeth. Its mouth is such a mishmash of teeth, it's impossible not to feel a little woozy when you look at it. It pulled its lips down, somehow containing all those teeth, and before my eyes, it vanished. My son was pretty upset when I grabbed him and carried him out of the house. I put him in the car, and we waited till his mother got off work before taking him to a nearby motel. I told her what I'd seen as best I could, and I think she believed there might be something going on now. My son is furious, saying that he needs to get back home so he can do his job, but he won't say what that is. Honestly, I think he's been collecting teeth for whatever that thing was. When I went back inside to get some clothes and check the house, I looked under his pillow and found another one of those strange coins. There's a box under his bed, too, and inside it's equal parts teeth and coins. There are around 20 of them, and they're sitting next to teeth of every shape and every size. Most of them are animal teeth, but some of them are definitely human teeth. I've taken the entire box with me, but the phone call I got from my wife before I left the house was what really worried me. She called to tell me that our son had locked himself in the bathroom, and she was afraid he was hurting himself. There's a weird squelching noise, followed by him yelling and crying. He'd locked himself in the bathroom, but I went to the manager to unlock it for us. What we found in there will stick with me for a long time. We're at the hospital now. My wife is in the ER room with him, while I sit in the waiting room and wait for updates. Protocol states only one parent can go in at a time, and my son doesn't want me to go in there. He can't speak very well, but he made that very clear to my wife. I gave him space, not wanting to exacerbate his condition any more than I have to. I've got the box on my lap as I sit out here, and I'm not really sure what to do with it. Inside are the 8 teeth that he managed to pull out of his own head before we got him restrained. Whatever this creature is, it must get its due, and my son is apparently intent on giving it that due. We'll probably end up having to take him to a mental facility, but I know he isn't crazy. I saw that thing too, and I know it'll find him no matter where we take him. So be careful when you tell your kids about the tooth fairy. What comes to collect their teeth might be something far worse than even you can imagine. Ugh. And I thought I was a weird kid for collecting birds' nests and things. Coming up next, we have a tale of a father whose obsession persists long after he does. And if you listen closely, maybe you too can hear the tapping of the keys. My dad died nearly 2 years ago, and we just buried him today. He was a writer, though you've probably never heard of him. He was known in small circles, celebrated by the community where he lived, but his books will likely never grace the shelves of Barnes and Nobles. I say that like it's a fact, but that may not be the case anymore. Dad, much like one of those painters from the 1800s, became infinitely more famous in his death than he ever was in life. People who wouldn't return his calls, wouldn't even think of publishing his work, now come to see him from miles away. This probably seems strange, given that I just told you that he's dead, so let me start at the beginning. Dad died as he lived, at his keyboard. He's been writing the same book for as long as I can remember. It's a massive 7 or 8 volume series. In one of my earliest memories, I can remember toddling into his office and looking up at him as he smiled down at me, his fingers never leaving the keyboard as he plinked away. Dad wrote other things for magazines or freelance work, but the books were his magnum opus. He would tell anyone who would listen, usually interested friends of mine who were aspiring writers themselves, how the book would be the greatest work once it was done. He had envisioned 10 books in all, detailing the hero's journey of his main character as he attempted to find his father's murderer across several continents, meeting people and finding clues along the way. I've heard him talk about that book almost every day since I was old enough to understand what he was talking about, but I couldn't tell you much about them. He never let anybody read them. He was so protective of them. I don't know more than a dozen people who were aware of its existence at all. That being said, he was always in his study when he had time, tapping away at the keys and refining his manuscript for the day that it would be picked up by an editor. I was the one who found him, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was getting ready for college, packing up my things, moving out, and I came to see if he would help me move some furniture onto the truck. He'd been in his office all day, and I kind of thought maybe he was mad at me. I know he didn't want me to leave. He was sad to see me go, but he had to understand that I had to go to college. I had a full-ride scholarship. I'd be a fool not to use it, and living on campus would give me access to resources I wouldn't have at home. It seemed like the best choice to move out, and I couldn't believe he couldn't see that. So when I stuck my head in and asked him, I was surprised when he didn't turn around. That only seemed to cement in my head the idea that he was mad at me. He had his back to the door, as he always did, fingers tapping away, and when he didn't say anything, I just stood there and looked at the back of his head for a moment. He had a bald spot forming, the hair receding away from the center, and I thought it was a little sad to watch my dad aging in such an obvious way. I asked him again, his fingers never slowing, but when he didn't say anything, I just went downstairs and managed to manhandle the desk into the U-Haul by myself. I decided I wouldn't bother him if he wanted to act like this. He would fold when it came time for me to leave, apologizing for acting like this, and we would have a hug before I drove off into the sunset. Around lunchtime, I looked at my now empty room and realized I was finished packing. Mom was at work at the post office, and I had planned to swing in and say bye on my way out of town. We had said our goodbyes that morning, with a lot of tears and hugging over breakfast, and Dad was the only one I still needed to say goodbye to. So I went upstairs again, saying I needed to leave and wondering if he'd give me a hug. His fingers just kept tapping away uninterrupted. "Come on, Dad," I said, stepping inside as he continued to ignore me. "I know you're bummed about this, but it's time for me to get out of here and make my own way. It's not like I'll never see you again. I'll be here for Thanksgiving. That's less than..." But when I put my hand on his shoulder, I noticed how cold it was. Dad had been up here for 3 days writing, and Mom said she didn't think he'd come to bed in all that time. That wasn't uncommon for Dad. He would hyperfixate on a project, or revisions for days at a time. His office was towards the back of the house on the 2nd floor, so without foot traffic or noise, he could lose himself for days as he worked. He usually came down for food after everyone was asleep, but I couldn't remember hearing him stumble around lately. I turned him towards me, his hands moving comically in front of him as he swung away from the desk, and as he came away, he began to scream as if someone was stabbing him. I stumbled away, taking in his long face and sunken eyes, and found myself running from the room as I grabbed the phone out of my pocket. Mom said she'd be home immediately, and as I waited downstairs, I could still hear him screaming in his office. She came home in a rush, going up the stairs 2 at a time, and when the screaming finally stopped, I breathed a sigh of relief. When she came downstairs, She asked me to come to his office. I need to talk to you about something, and I think this should be a family decision. I came back to see that Dad was still staring at the screen of his MacBook, tapping away like we weren't even there. I don't know how to explain this, but your father's dead. Looking at his fingers as they went about their tireless typing, I asked if she was kidding. Dad was clearly alive. His hands were moving, and I could see words on the screen forming coherent sentences. Were they playing a joke or something? None of what she was saying made any sense. I checked his pulse. He has no pulse, no vitals. He's gone, sweetie. But it appears that he's not quite gone. She tried to move him, and as she turned him away from the computer, I could see his lifeless face as it turned to regard me. His jaw had been hanging slack, his eyes open and staring, and as his hands came away from the keyboard, he started screaming all over again. It was deep and tortured, similar to the one he'd made before, and without even meaning to, I turned him back to the keyboard where his hands started typing again. I asked her what was going on, and Mom shrugged as she tried to come up with a reason for this. His book was important to him. You know that. I think maybe once he finishes it, he might stop on his own. I can't explain what's happening here, but I don't want him to die with his work unfinished. Your father kept saying it wasn't ready, but I'm going to send the first manuscript to his editor. Maybe once he sees it and someone puts it into print, he'll finally be able to rest. Either way, let's keep this between us, okay? I want your father to pass on without regrets, don't you? I nodded, telling her of course I did. I wanted Dad to die in peace. Then do him this last favor, and don't tell anyone what you've seen here. Promise? I really didn't know how to feel about this, but I told her I wouldn't tell anyone, and she thanked me as she hugged me goodbye. I left in my U-Haul, unsure how to feel about the situation, but I kept the secret. I didn't come home for the next year. I came home for Thanksgiving, as promised, but the whole thing felt uncomfortable. Mom and I sat downstairs eating, her curious about how school was going, and me filling her in on my studies. As I ate turkey and tried to have a normal conversation over stuffing, all I could focus on was the tap, tap, tapping from upstairs. Mom had closed the door to Dad's office, something that I could never remember happening at any time in my life. But despite her best efforts, the tapping was still audible. There was a smell from the room at the end of the hall, and I was worried about her living in a house with a decomposing body. She said he hadn't decomposed much, but I think she might have been trying to spare my feelings. Worse than the smell, though, was the tapping. It never stopped. It sounded too loud to be from whole fingers. Despite this, Mom was in pretty good spirits. She said that Dad's first book was being edited, and his publicist thought it was likely to be ready for shelves by next year. He couldn't believe my dad had been keeping this gem to himself for so long, and I think that's when I really realized how few people Dad had shared his book with. She said the initial payment on the book had allowed her to pay some overdue bills, and she would send him the second book sometime next year. If I release them slowly, it won't seem so odd when he finishes, and I let them know that he's passed. I asked if his writing had slowed at all, and she said that he was typing all day and night. He never rests, and I've had to start sleeping in my noise-canceling headphones. The sound takes some getting used to, but I think I can put it out of my mind. I had meant to stay the week, but I ended up making excuses and leaving the day after Thanksgiving. The sound of the keys as they clicked away was becoming too much for me to handle. After that, I made excuses not to come home. I told Mom I had a paper due during Christmas and stayed on campus over the holiday. I took extra classes so I didn't have to come home on the semesters that I'd be able to take a break from. I still called her on the phone, but our conversations became shorter and shorter as time went on. The longer I was on the line with her, the more pervasive the clicking became, and it felt like I could hear it over the phone no matter where she was. Mom's mental state began to deteriorate as well. She'd sent the second book to his publicist, and he'd fast-tracked it after the first one had done so well. She deflected any sort of interviews or phone calls for Dad, telling them how shy and anxious he was. But people really seemed to want to pick his brain about the direction of the books, and they were becoming harder and harder to put off. She didn't sound like her usual self either. It was clear that she wasn't sleeping. She said the clicking was getting louder and louder the longer it went on. I tried to do some soundproofing on the office, but it never seems to help. I can't stand to be in there for very long. Even though he's looking at the screen, I can feel him watching me when I'm in there. I think I can hear something moving around at night, too. Mom took a deep breath, and I could almost see her looking in the direction of the office as she pitched her voice lower. I asked what she meant, afraid that maybe animals had gotten in to try to get at Dad's body. But she said it was just little sounds. You remember how he used to leave his office late at night to get food? Sometimes I feel like I can hear someone coming down the stairs in the wee hours of the morning. While I was listening to it the other night, I realized that I couldn't hear the keyboard anymore, and that scared me even more. She started crying then, and I think I had already decided to come home that weekend so we could sort this out. I hadn't come home in a long time, and I found a very different woman than the one I had found over Thanksgiving a year before. And why not? It had to be nerve-wracking, knowing you were sharing a house with a corpse. Mom looked like she had aged 20 years. Her hair, light blonde the last time I'd seen it, was threaded with gray and looked thinner than ever. Her skin sagged, and her eyes looked bruised from the bags under them. She was so thin to the point of emaciation, and I wondered if she had been eating. When she hugged me, I could feel her ribs pressing against me, and I decided then that something had to be done before I lost both my parents. I told her that we had to end this. I told her that we had to put him to rest, but she feebly resisted. He isn't done yet. He's still typing up there. I can't lay him to rest until he's finished. I asked her how long that would be, but she didn't seem to have an answer. I told her I was tired and wanted to rest, but after I heard her door close and the sound of her springs grumbling as she went to bed, I got up and went downstairs. I wanted to see what this thing was that was moving around after dark, and I knew just the place to hide. There was a small closet in the living room, a place for wrapping paper and old crafts Mom hadn't gotten around to yet. And after sliding some things around, I made myself comfortable and cracked the door. It took some time. I wished I had some coffee to keep me from dozing in the small, warm place. I was just starting to nod off, my phone showing 3:30 in the morning, when the landing at the top of the stairs creaked. Something glided down almost soundlessly, its body light as I pressed my eye to the slit in the door to see what it was. It was dark in the living room, the curtains drawn, but I didn't dare turn on my light. If it knew I was here, it might flee, and then I'd have nothing to report to Mom in the morning. Luckily for me, it jostled right past the closet door, and the creature was impossible to miss. It was thin, almost lacking dimensions, creaking as it ambled into the kitchen. I held my breath as it disappeared into the dim space, but the pale head was hard to miss. When it turned to look at the closet from the kitchen doorway, I feared I'd made a noise. When those empty eye sockets fixed on the door, I covered my mouth with my hands. When the creature creaked its way into the kitchen and disappeared from sight, I tripped out of the closet and made my way less than gracefully back up the stairs and into my old room. If it heard me, it didn't stop at the door to comment. Only then did I come to the same conclusion that my mother had, realizing what was missing from the silent house. The tapping had stopped. We called the police the next day, me threatening to call them myself if Mom didn't. I didn't know what that thing was I'd seen the night before in the kitchen, but I couldn't very well leave her alone with it. She just nodded and picked up the phone. I think she was ready to call them, honestly. She lived with Dad's corpse for 2 years, and even she had to agree it was time to end it. The paramedics weren't sure what to make of him, but he was definitely what I had seen the night before when it came into the kitchen. He had almost completely rotted, but his bones had moldering flesh still attached in places. His scalp had some hair clinging to it. The bald spot I had noticed was still visible, but we had taken his hands off the keyboard before they got there. When we had taken him from the computer, his scream was little more than a wheeze of protest. He had no vocal cords to scream with, but still, he protested. The police had questions, but I think Mom managed to convince them that it was all harmless. She said that when he died, she had just gone a little bit crazy. She couldn't cope with him being gone, so she just pretended he was in his office, typing away on his novel. I told them that that was what she had told me for months, and I think they believed me. Dad's remains were taken to the funeral home, and it goes without saying that his funeral was a closed casket affair. As we sat on the front row, though, I heard something that would haunt me until I went into the ground myself. Dad may not have been able to scream, but it seemed his work went on regardless. As I sat there with Mom, my mother sobbing as she heard the all-too-familiar sound, we both heard the low tapping of those bony fingers smacking against the lid of the coffin. I can only assume that they still press against the lid even now, my father's last story, worn into the wood of his coffin. I can see my bull-headed ass sitting up long after I was dead, still trying to crank out stories, still trying to make YouTube videos. I guess that works out well for you guys, but, I don't know. It's Florida. I'm not sure how long my corpse would last in that kind of heat. Moving on, we have a dad with a strange kind of, I don't know what you'd call it. I guess he's got some pretty serious blinders on when it comes to his physical condition. Something that really turns out to bite him in the butt in the end. So let's hear a story about how Dad had a hole in his head. I'm not sure which was weirder. The fact that Dad had a hole in his head, or the fact that he was just so unimpressed with it. Dad had come home from his job at the steel mill, just as he had 1,000 times. We heard him sit his hard hat down by the door as he stripped out of his jumpsuit before coming to dinner. Mom had meatloaf on the table with potatoes and peas, Dad's favorite, and we waited patiently for him to arrive like we always did. If this sounds weird to you, that's because it should. Dad had a strange idea that he should go to work, Mom should stay at home and keep the kids, and that everyone should look like an episode of Leave It to Beaver when he got home. I remember for a while, Mom met him at the door with a cold glass of beer when he came home. He eventually told her to stop so that the dust from the mill didn't get on her. It was odd, but Dad paid the bills, and that's how he liked it, so that's what we did. Mom had gotten half of her welcome home greeting out before it curdled in her throat. My brother had already seen it, but I was still looking at the TV around the corner and hadn't seen it yet. MTV was playing a song by a band I liked, and I looked up at Mom to ask if I could use the bathroom when I noticed Dad's head. Dad, meanwhile, had sat down at the table like nothing was amiss, opening his napkin and putting it on his lap. He was hungry from a day at work, and he had just started asking us about our own day when he noticed our horrified looks. What? What's the matter? All three of us were speechless for a moment. How did he not realize what had us all so gobsmacked? Surely he had to feel that. He had to realize what had happened to him. There was no way that a person could be so oblivious of something like that. In the center of Dad's forehead was a hole big enough to stick your pinky finger into. It wasn't like a wound. Wounds usually bleed or appear red or scabby. This one was simply a black hole in his forehead. The edges looked a little ragged, but that more reminded me of a hole that someone had drilled into the pavement than a wound. As strange as the hole was, the fact that it didn't seem to have an exit point was even stranger. "Honey," Mom asked, trying to be diplomatic about the situation, Did something happen at work today?" "No," Dad said, looking at her speculatively. "Well, Stubbins was changing the no-slip grating on the walkways, but that's really not that weird, I guess." Are you sure nothing odd happened today?" she asked, trying to tiptoe around the matter so she didn't upset him. Sometimes Dad could have a temper, and none of us wanted to see it. "I guess, maybe," he seemed to think about it. "There was this guy I bumped into on the sidewalk. I fell down, and he helped me up, but it was nothing." When she continued to look at him skeptically, he set his fork down angrily and glowered at her. "Look, Martha, if you have something to ask, then just go ahead and ask it. I'm trying to eat here." "Dad, there's a huge hole in your freaking head." I was never what you'd call subtle. Dad wrinkled his eyebrows at me. "What in the hell are you talking about?" There's a hole in your forehead. How do you not feel that? Are you trying to be funny? 'Cause you know I don't like jokes." Despite his gruff tone, though, he began feeling around his forehead, as if trying to find the source of discomfort. He seemed half-hearted, like he was just doing it as a favor by looking at it in the first place. But when his fingers touched the ragged edges of the hole, he shuddered a little. I didn't think it had hurt him, not really. It was more like the shudder you get when you have an itch and you scratch it. He inspected it with his fingers for a moment, before getting up to look at it in the bathroom mirror. The three of us hovered just outside the door as he looked at it in the mirror, and we must have looked like some old comedy routine as we waited for his prognosis. After a few minutes of poking and prodding at it, he finally turned away and walked past us, leaving us just standing there. We found him at the kitchen table, eating his dinner like any other night. "Sit down. Your mother's meatloaf is getting cold," he told us, once he noticed we were there. "Dad," I started, but Mom put a hand on my shoulder. "Harold, there's a hole in your head. Don't you think we should go to the hospital?" Dad turned his emotionless gaze on her, making it clear that he didn't want to talk about it. When we didn't move, he growled in his throat in a deep, phlegmy way. "Doctor won't be able to do anything but poke at it and charge me an arm and a leg. Not going to no doctor. Now sit down and eat." Then he went back to eating, ignoring us until we returned to the table and ate as well. We all tried not to notice the hole as we ate, but it was hard to ignore. As we sat and watched TV that night, the TV screen seemed to reflect off that dark hole. Mom laughed every time the audience did, but Dad never did. Well, that's not entirely true. Dad did this thing when he found something funny. 1 part chuckle and 9 parts phlegmy rumble. When I was a kid, I had asked Mom once why Dad never laughed or smiled, and she told me that he laughed often and smiled daily. It's just hard to tell with your father. He's not quite as obvious about it as the rest of us are. After that, I started paying more attention to Dad, and I'd come to the point where I could pick up on the subtle twitches at the corner of his mouth, the gravelly rumble when he chuckled, the minute crinkling at the edges of his beetle-black eyes. They helped me tell when my dad was in a good mood, and when he felt less like hitting and more like patting, when you could ask him for a favor, when it was best to leave him alone. It was a talent my younger brother never learned, and it was a mistake that often earned him a cuff upside the back of the head when he'd try to hit Dad up for money. Dad was enjoying the byplay tonight as Raymond bemoaned everything from his mother to his job, but my mind was still firmly fastened on the hole. As I watched it, I almost fancied that I could see it expand and retract, as though it were breathing. I told myself it was the light from the TV, but the longer I watched, the surer I became that it was moving. It was like a ragged mouth, pulling in and pushing out air. It was subtle, like my father's moods, and the longer I watched, the more apparent it became. When my father turned his gaze on me, I realized he had caught me staring. "Either go to bed or stop staring at me. You're creeping me out." I pushed off the love seat and went to my room. I knew I wouldn't be able to focus on anything as long as that hole was on display. The next few days were uneventful, I guess, but I noticed that Dad started wearing a hat when he went outside. I wished he would wear it inside, too, because the hole seemed to always be watching me whenever I was around him. It wasn't, of course, because it didn't have any eyes, but I could feel that itchy feeling you sometimes get when someone's staring at you. It looked like it was getting bigger, too. But if it pained Dad, he didn't say anything about it. He mostly ignored it, his only exception to ignoring it being the hat he wore outside. Dad was stubborn, but he wasn't foolish. Dad was a sensible person who liked to keep attention off himself. Over the next 10 days, the hole got noticeably bigger. When we'd first seen it, it had been maybe big enough to put your pinky finger inside. Now I could have easily put several in there, and still he refused to go to the hospital. Mom tried to coax him, but he said it wasn't worth bothering a doctor over. If it was bad, it would hurt, and it doesn't. If it means to go away, it'll do it on its own. He went to work, came home, watched TV, and all the time that hole continued to grow. I found myself looking at my father more and more often, that gaping chasm seeming to look at me, even when his hat was on. I started having dreams about that hole, and in my dreams it oozed and bled, and a single eyeball rolled around to look at me. No matter what Dad was doing in the dream, that eye stared at me until I came awake, gasping. Then one day, he came to breakfast, and the hole had taken in his eyebrows. It wasn't a hole now, it was more like a pit, a crater, that just so happened to sit in the middle of my father's head. Mom was left with an egg halfway to her mouth as she stared into that gaping void. We could all see it breathing now, the push and pull of its respiration as it drew in its terrible breath. Dad sat eating his own eggs and grits, pretending like nothing was wrong, but it was clear that he felt it too. He refused to answer any of us when we called his name, and left for work with his breakfast only half eaten. I noticed that when he came home from work that day, there was a different hard hat on the table in the entryway. The hard hat had a slant to it, and would better cover the hole. Dad may act like nothing was wrong, but I couldn't. I started avoiding him. I would come down to breakfast late, since I knew he'd be at work. I would make excuses to stay out so I could miss dinner. I did any number of other things to avoid being in the house, but it hardly seemed to matter. I had begun to hear some kind of strange whispering as I lay in bed at night, and it permeated my dreams as the eye inside began to whisper words I didn't understand. The words were alien, harsh, and unwantable, but I felt I knew their meaning. My sleep became as ragged as my father's moods, and if I hadn't been barely into my senior year of high school, I think I would have moved out. Then about a month and a half after the spot appeared, Dad didn't come down for breakfast. Mom told us that Dad wasn't feeling well. She said he must have gotten sick in the night, but the way her eyes looked told me something beyond sickness was at play. He didn't go to work that day, and unknown to us, he would never go back to work again. Mom moved into the guest bedroom, and I wouldn't find out till later it was because Dad had locked the door and wouldn't let her in. We could hear him in there bumping around. Mom would leave food in the hallway, but we never saw him take it. This went on until one morning when I forgot my notebook upstairs. I'd been heading to school, leafing through my bag, when I realized I'd forgotten my biology notebook. I had a test that day, and I wanted to study before class. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard the door to my parents' bedroom open. I stopped halfway up, not sure whether I should continue or not. None of us had seen Dad since he went into hiding, and my brother and I had been very curious about what was happening with the hole. I put my fingers on the carpet and scrambled slowly up the stairs, peeking over the edge of the stairs as I heard the scrape of silverware being bumped. I could see my father's back, clad in a bathrobe and knee socks, as he bent over for the day's breakfast tray that my mom had left for him. He seemed to be having trouble grabbing it, and his hands threatened to knock over the juice that she had set beside the bowl of oatmeal. Then he stood up, and I had to put my hand over my mouth as he came into view. The top of his head looked like nothing so much as one of those cartoon holes they used to trap each other. It was a swirling black vortex that looked a mile deep, and as he turned to go back into the room, I could see the hole was like some kind of optical illusion. It was exactly as deep on the other side as it was on the back. He turned and took the tray back into the bedroom, but when he bumped the tray on the corner of the door, I realized why we had heard him banging around so much the last few days. In my dream, the hole always had an eye, but in reality, it had stolen my father's sight. The dreams became different after that. Every night I dreamed that my family was eating around the breakfast table. My brother sat on my left, my mom sat on my right. Dad sat across from me, bent over his breakfast as usual. They all sat eating food from a massive pile, their breakfast more like a buffet. I seemed to be the only one paying attention to the strange creature wearing father's clothes, and the food he ate was pushed into the circle hole atop his head. As I watched, the eye emerged again, but it wasn't alone this time. The eye was in a face, and the face was long and terrible. The skin was tan and leathery, like a hide left out in the sun too long. The hair was white and fine like a corpse's. The teeth were jagged and yellow, its eyes the cataract threads of the chronically blind, and when its face rolled around to look at me, I would shake as its lips rose in an almost comical grin. As everyone ate, the mouth opened, and a low whisper began to assault my ears. Every night, that whisper became a little louder, and over time, I came to understand the words, "Shally shally may ray, fori fori may gra, lee raleigh grega, su raleigh drema." The words slid into my ears like slugs, coating my brain in the forbidden knowledge they possessed. I wasn't sure what the dream meant, but I knew that they were meant for me. Was this the thing that had been staring at me the whole time? Was this the reason I had felt watched? As the dreams continued, I began humming or reciting the words it spoke to myself during the day. I would catch myself making little rhymes out of it,
and they were never far from my mind. It was almost soothing to speak those words, a balm to the terrible dreams and the terrible fear that wormed its way through my mind. I knew what it wanted me to do, and one night I did my part. I needed to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, my bladder full to bursting. I was leaving the bathroom when I noticed that the door to my parents' room was open for the first time in a long time. There was a noise coming from inside, and it sounded pained. I thought maybe one of the dogs had gotten in there and gotten hurt, but I think even then I knew what I would find. Dad was on the ground, his swirling head practically hyperventilating as it pulled in and out. The swirls had taken in Dad's shoulders and the top of his chest. He was lying on the floor, flopping around as his arms protruded from the vortex. I reached down and helped him sit with his back to the bed. He couldn't talk, probably couldn't even see, but he seemed to understand that I was there to help him. As I looked at the swirling mass, though, I felt the words come to my lips. I don't know if they were intentional, but I know they were the words that needed to be said. Shali Shali Rayma, Fori Fori Megra, Li Raleigh Grega, Su Raleigh Drema. As the words fell from me, I saw something swirling in the mass of shadows. I was worried it would be the huge eye, like the one I'd seen in my dreams, but I was even more afraid that it would be the ancient face that I often saw amidst the vortex. As it swirled and thrummed, I could see the white hair beginning to sprout from the depths. The head was coming on fast, and as those eyes emerged from the depths, I could see the corners cast up in a smile. My shaky legs took me away from him with small, stuttery steps. His face came free of the murk, but it wasn't done yet. As his head slid free, a withered form emerged beneath it. He was naked, looking like some kind of wizened mummy, as his leathery skin slid from the dark pool. Below the dark pit that had made up my father's head, his body began to shrivel up like a 4th of July firework, becoming blackened embers before my eyes. The more of that evil thing that came free, the less of him there was, and when his withered feet touched down on the soft carpet of my parents' bedroom, what remained of my father simply blew away. The old man reached down for the grubby bathrobe that Dad had been wearing, and tittered as he pulled it around himself.
Took you long enough, but I guess I can't be upset. You and your father have served me well, though you never realized you were doing it. Your reward is not sharing in his fate. Your punishment is knowing you are responsible for my return to this world. What you do with these gifts is up to you.
Then he left, just walked out of our house and into the night. As the sun comes up over my mother's kitchen, I realize I've been writing this since I managed to get back to my feet and walk shakily down the stairs. I've been trying to write down as much of this experience as possible so I won't forget any of it, but it's so weird, and it's hard to put it all into words. What the hell was that thing that ultimately killed my father? Did it make the hole in his head? Why him? As I sit here watching the sun come up, I realize I may never know.
One more story for you, and I think I've got a pretty good one to close us out with. For our last story, let's hear a tale about a father trying to keep up his own father's legacy, though maybe not in the way his father would have wanted. Let's hear a story about Grandpa's garden. I came home from work to find my wife vacuuming in my son's room. Again? I asked, already guessing the answer. She sighed. It's the second time this week, Dave. I need this to stop. I shook my head, laughing a little. I'll talk to him, I promised, and went to find my son. It isn't that strange for kids to collect things. Some of them collect bugs or baseball cards or interesting rocks, but my son's interest was getting pretty weird. I could have understood finding Pokemon cards or even a box of old animal bones, but what he was collecting was dirt. It had started on Wednesday when his mother had been changing his sheets. She had noticed some dust on them, but that's pretty common for a 6-year-old. He wasn't a huge fan of baths, and Sometimes he slept in the same clothes he had went to preschool in. It wasn't until she picked up the pillow so she could remove the case that she found the fistful of dirt that was hidden under it. It was quite a bit of dirt, or so she said. She claimed it was about 6 or 7 big handfuls, and she wondered how long he had been putting it in there. She cleaned it up and asked him not to put dirt under his pillow again. It seemed he hadn't listened. I walked into the kitchen to find David coloring a picture at the table. I could see that he'd been digging in the dirt again, even from here. It seemed he'd been digging in the backyard a lot lately. David liked to garden, which was weird for a boy his age, but we tried to encourage him to be curious. His grandpa, my dad, had been teaching him how to garden before he passed, and I thought that he might have been continuing the garden his grandpa was tending, as a way to remember him. I looked over at the back door as I approached the table, and I could see the flowers coming in. I guessed that David, like his grandpa, had a green thumb. "What you drawing, buddy?" I looked over his shoulder and saw that he was drawing flowers that circled a big tree, the very garden that I'd been looking at. "The garden," he answered, in his innocent little voice. I nodded, rolling a purple crayon under my finger. "You been playing in the garden today?" "Mm-hmm," he said, his tongue sticking out as he colored. I nodded again, clearly beating around the bush as I tried to get to the point. "Mom says she keeps finding dirt under your pillow. Is there a reason you keep hiding dirt under there?" "'Cause he tells me to," David said. "Who tells you to, buddy?" He opened his mouth, but he seemed to think better of it. "No one," he said, too quickly. That made me feel a little uneasy. "You can tell me, buddy. Is someone making you put dirt under there?" "No," he said, and when he kept ignoring me to color his picture, I started to lose interest. "Okay, well, no more dirt under your pillow. Okay, buddy?" "Yes, Daddy," he said, and I left him to his coloring, thinking the situation had been handled. I was heading to the shower later, his bedtime already passed, when I heard something that made me wonder. No, they say I can't do it anymore." "I don't know. I don't want to stop talking to you, but I have to follow the rules." He was quiet. He seemed to be listening to something. I know you want out. I'm trying my best, but it's hard to dig." I peeked around the corner and saw him lying in bed. He was talking to his pillow, his words muffled sometimes as he spoke to whoever it was that he was talking to. If someone was talking to him, it was too low for me to hear, and when he rolled away from the door, I wondered if he was talking to the dirt that was probably under his pillow. I started watching him a little closer after that, especially when he was in the garden. He watered and weeded daily, but sometimes it seemed like he was just digging, like all kids did. But this digging wasn't as haphazard as it could have been. He was digging in a particular place, what would have been the south side of the tree. I didn't really like him playing there. It stirred up a lot of memories, but it would have seemed odd for me to tell him to stop. He was digging in the exact place where his grandfather had laid as he breathed his last. I took some comfort that he had died in his garden, a place he loved more than most people, it seemed. I'd seen him working in the garden all the time when I was a kid, but my interactions hadn't been as nice as the one I'd had with my son. No one was allowed to touch his plants but him. And I got taken to task more times than I care to remember over things that happened in the garden. An errant football or a misthrown baseball was all it would take to get a lick with the belt across my backside. My son seemed to have been immune to this, however. When he was born, he had become the apple of his grandpa's eye. My dad would take him into the garden, teaching him how to till the soil, how to plant, and when to plant. They had loved it out there, but Dad had always made it clear that it was an activity for him and his grandson, and I wasn't invited. "You just mess it up, like you did when you were little," he would say. Now it seemed my son was keeping the garden in his memory, but it was still weird to see him out there digging so furiously. The dirt kept appearing under his pillow. Not just under his pillow, either. The dirt was beginning to appear under his bed. His mother was beside herself, and every day when I came home, it seemed like there was more dirt in the house. "You have to talk to him," she said one night, my son once again coloring at the table. "Today, I found it under his bed, under his pillow, and in buckets in his closet. I don't know how it's getting in here, or where he's even getting it all from, but it has to stop." I rubbed my neck as I came into the kitchen. I'd never been as hands-on as my dad had been. I didn't want my son to fear me the way that I had feared his grandpa. I tried not to shout, and I'd never so much as swatted his hand. I wanted him raised differently, but it seemed that now I'd given him a little bit too much leeway. "Hey, I thought we talked about the dirt, kiddo." David nodded, not looking up from his coloring. "Yeah, I know." He was coloring another picture of the garden, the flowers in bloom, and now there was something different there, too. In the middle of the garden was a dark hole that seemed to sit right between all the colorful plants. A hole with a pair of red eyes looking out of it. I didn't like that hole. It was right in the place my son usually dug, and it made me shudder. "What's that?" I asked, pointing to the hole that he had colored with his black crayon. All except the eyes. "Nothing," he said, too quickly. "No secrets, pal. Come on. I won't be mad. Does it have something to do with the dirt?" David looked like he wanted to say something, but instead he just shook his head. "No, it's just a hole." I didn't press it, but I probably should have. I reminded him that the dirt needed to stay in the yard, and he went back to coloring. That night, however, I lingered by his door after lights out to see if I could catch any more weird conversations. I wasn't disappointed. My wife looked at me strangely as she came out of the bathroom, but I shushed her and told her to move on. She shrugged, shaking her head as she went past, but I was sure that the whispering had something to do with it. I was crouched by the doorframe like some kind of stalker as he wallowed down underneath his covers. When David started whispering, I was ready. No, they said I couldn't anymore. No, they'll catch me and I'll get in trouble. Mom already said I couldn't play video games until the weekend, and it'll be longer if I get caught again." David paused for a long time then, like he was listening to something, and when he spoke again, I could hear the tears in his voice. "Don't talk like that. Of course I love you. I want you to get better. I know, but I can't keep bringing it inside. I know why you want me to do it, but I can't. If you loved me so much, then you wouldn't ask me to." And then I heard him flop over and go to sleep, and if whoever he was talking to was still talking, he wasn't listening. I kept watching him over the next few days, but he didn't even go near the garden until it was time to water or weed it. David stayed inside more, reading or coloring, but the dirt still appeared. It wasn't a lot, just a few handfuls beneath his pillow, but my wife was beside herself with anger. She grounded him for a month from playing video games, and wouldn't let him stay at his friend's house until further notice. He nodded, accepting it, but I'd begun to wonder where it was all coming from. I mentioned this to her, but she just pushed it off as him doing it when no one was looking. It's under his pillow. It has to be him. Who else could be bringing dirt into the house? Punished or not, David didn't seem to be bothered by it. In fact, I thought he might be getting sick. He was listless, dark circles forming under his eyes, and I took him to the doctor at the end of the first week to make sure that he didn't have a cold or something. She said he was healthy, but she wanted to put him on something to help him sleep. Poor kid looks like he's suffering from exhaustion. The source of his exhaustion became apparent a few nights later. I would have probably never caught him if I hadn't gotten up to pee at around 3 a.m. I stopped at his door to check on him, and something didn't seem right. His bed didn't look the way it usually did. His pillows were a little too poofy, and when I flipped back the covers, I found that David's bed was empty. I started tearing through the house, checking everywhere that he might be, and when I came to the kitchen, I found that someone had left the back porch light on. I couldn't see him, not at first, but then I saw something come flying up over the hole in the middle of the garden. "I don't know," I heard him half whisper from the hole. "I thought you said you were there." I crept up to the hole, not making a sound, but as I got closer, I heard David start to get frustrated. "I don't know. I'm trying, but the ground's too hard. I can't get to you, Grandpa. I want to help you, but the ground's too hard. My fingers are bleeding. Please, help me. I've dug so deep. I can't. David?" I asked, and he jumped and looked up guiltily. "It's a little late for digging, don't you think?" He looked down as he stood in that hole, and when I put a hand down and offered to get him some hot chocolate so we could talk about this, he shook his head. No, I need to get Grandpa out. He says he's trapped, and I need to get him out." He tried to keep digging, but there was no going any deeper. My wife came out when I called for help, but we couldn't manage to wrestle him out of the hole. We had to call for help from the people in the white vans who spoke in soft voices, and that was the end of David's digging. The men at the facility they took him to say he's doing much better. Being away from the garden seems to help him, but they want to keep him for a while so they can be sure. I hate it for him. I hate seeing David like this, and I hate even more that I can't tell them the truth. The truth is that I know why David keeps the dirt under his pillow. It's the same reason I try to avoid the backyard as much as possible. You see, I haven't been the best narrator, and for that I apologize. I had thought that only 2 people knew what really happened to my dad. To most of the world, they think he just wandered off and never came back. He'd been diagnosed with dementia after all, but he was such a stubborn old goat that he wouldn't go live with anyone. The only person he ever remembered was David, but after getting a call to come pick him up from the police, I'd tried to put my foot down. Dad didn't like that. He didn't like that one bit. This time, however, when he tried to put his hands on me, I pushed him away, and he smashed his head on one of those huge roots at the bottom of the tree. Dad had made my childhood a living nightmare, and I wasn't going to let him take my adulthood because I had finally decided to stand up for myself. So I buried him. I buried him in his garden. I planted some flowers on top of it. No one looked too hard. People moved on, and as his only living child, I took control of my childhood home and his accounts. Sitting here writing this, I can hear him whispering as I sit on the back patio and listen to the night birds. He wants out. He wants to be buried next to Mom, and he wants the police to know what I did, but he'll need something better than a 6-year-old to dig him up. The concrete I poured on top of him before I filled in the hole will keep most things from uncovering him. The more I think about it, the more I think this backyard could use a pool. Something below ground. Something with a diving board. I think those flowers have been here about long enough. And just like that, our stories have come to an end once again. But don't worry, we'll be back again very soon with more great stories here on Cozy Horror. Till then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.